You are listening to the Dare to Love podcast with your hosts, Sonica Tinker and Christian Peterson, founders of LoveWorks. Welcome to the Dare to Love podcast, everyone. This is Christian Peterson. I will be your host today. And today I'm very excited to introduce you to my friend and colleague and a very interesting human being, I'll tell you. I'm talking today to Veronica Monet, and I'll introduce her first, and then you'll get to hear from Veronica herself. So here goes. Veronica Monet, ACS, is an internationally acclaimed sexual and spiritual empowerment change agent. CNN, Fox, Politically Incorrect, Yale, Stanford, and UC Berkeley are just a few of the numerous news and educational institutions that have hosted Veronica for her forward-thinking insights and expertise. Veronica helps individuals and couples heal shame, align with their spiritual core, and live more joyfully. As a relationship coach, sexologist, anger specialist, and empath, she combines her extensive education and experience with deep emotional intelligence and compassion. Having personally overcome incest, rape, violence, and abuse, she's committed to helping others own their personal and erotic empowerment. Veronica invites you to join her in the shame-free zone, and I'll just add here that is also where you can find Veronica, theshamefreezone.com. On her website, you'll discover game-changing, exquisite partnership formula, which is a program designed to turn conflict into connection and sexual intimacy that grows deeper with each passing year. Big welcome to you, Veronica. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here talking with you. Really happy about that.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe I know I just shared your introduction here, but maybe in your own words, tell our listeners a little bit about how did you get into this kind of work? What led up to you now being a sexologist and empowering people around?
Absolutely. Well, so I was raised in a very conservative Christian cult, and it was actually a doomsday cult, and very, very shame-based around sexuality. So crawling out of that, and it is, obviously my bio says I'm recovering from incest, and this was just so indicative of that kind of shame culture. It often has a subterranean context of sexual perpetration. And seeing that hypocrisy was really disturbing for me as a child. So I grew out of that. I left the cult. I went to college, became pretty rebellious and promiscuous, and got into all kinds of adventures and problems, mishaps. At some point, I got clean and sober in a 12-step program, and this started me on a deeply committed spiritual path. And this is going to be a little bit mind-bending for some people, but you said I was a very interesting, unique person. Yeah,
I did.
I actually was 4 years clean and sober when I entered the sex industry. And I did so with a college degree and 7 years of corporate experience behind me. So it's a very empowered place to be coming from. It wasn't survival sex or anything like that. It was, very high end and often glamorous work. And I did it for 14 years. And most of that time I was married and raising 2 children. So I defy a lot of stereotypes. I spent a lot of time actively working for sex worker rights, and that's one of the reasons I got so much media coverage. I did a lot of television for 15 years, including Bill Maher's Politically Incorrect, which was, for me, kind of a highlight because it was no longer debating people on CNN or Fox. I was actually getting to do a comedy show, which was a lot of fun. So, like I said, it had its glamorous moments, and then
maybe if I can interrupt you, I just got to ask the question that I can hear coming from listeners is, if you were, you had already gotten yourself clean and sober, you're empowered, college degree, as you say, what motivated you or inspired you to step into the sex industry? It's often thought of as a desperate move. Sounds like that was not the case for you.
Not at all. I met somebody who was working as a high-end escort, and she drove a really nice car, lived in a really nice house, had 3 kids and a husband, and she just defied all my stereotypes. She was
Hmm.
super healthy human being, very one of the happiest people I'd met, actually. I was really intrigued. So I wanted to find out more about it, and I think it was also really about exploring human sexuality, which
Hmm.
so when I'm working with people now as a sexologist, which is strictly no hands, I mean,
Hmm.
it's hands off. It's just talk counseling. Um, I come from this place of authority where I have years and years of experience, and I haven't just read about something from a book. And almost without exception, whatever my clients bring into my office, I have personal knowledge of.
Hmm.
So they find in me a friend who is not judging, not putting them off in a corner as being other than. They feel some kinship, if you will, and certainly they know that I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think there was some way of just wanting to take a deep dive into this sexual shame. And I am on a mission to try to heal this planet of sexual shame. I think it leads to violence. I think it leads to um, a lot of social ills. And we see this sometimes, I think, in. Unfortunately, some of the scandal that's coming out about the Catholic Church, we see a
Hmm.
lot of that sexual shame just drives things underground. And I'm all about trying to teach people consent and being fully conscious around their sexuality.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
often both. I mean, Sonica would say the same thing in our work. Just in our experience, it's that you can't actually drive your sexual drive completely underground. Try as we may, it seems, and I wonder what your thought is about this. It seems to me that it has to be expressed somehow.
Well, I think we've got things a little bit backwards in our culture because we think of sex as something that comes later in life, and actually, it starts in the womb.
Hmm.
So, if you think about that, we've got now visual proof of fetuses masturbating to the point of orgasm, both male and female. So it's kind of silly to think that it's not core to our essence and to our being.
Hmm.
And I always like to challenge people to think, well, what do you think that baby is thinking about when it's masturbating? Because I guarantee you, it's not about porn. It's never seen it. It's
Yeah.
it's not about touching another human body because it's never had that experience. It's not about falling in love. It's not about uh, procreating. Um, it's something else, and I believe that it's a spiritual connection.
Hmm.
There's something in there that is goes beyond even the pleasure factor and really connects us to the divine.
Hmm.
And being cheated out of that, what I consider our birthright, and a connection with that that's in balance and holistic, I think leads to shame and a
Hmm.
lot of acting out of things that are very dysfunctional and often lead to us violating boundaries and perpetrating.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I
Yeah.
think about it. Think about it. If in fact most of us had our first orgasm in the womb, that was before our first breath of air and our first
Hmm.
sip of mother's milk. So
That's a
it's
very interesting thought. I'd
it
never heard that in my whole life, actually.
I think there's people actively trying to suppress this information, but I'm happy to send you the links to the
Hmm.
research.
Well,
Yeah.
actually, if you do, maybe that would be nice, and I can include it in the notes to this podcast.
I would love to do that.
Okay.
Absolutely. I'll
Well,
send you
so
some sonograms too, so you can actually see it.
awesome. Well, thanks for that for starters here, and I'm really excited to talk to you. You have such a wealth of expertise and experience around this topic that I'm sure we'll run out of time before I run out of questions.
Okay.
But for our listeners, you're in for some serious good advice and expertise from Veronica here. So let's start with actually something before we hit the record button. You said something that had me think about this. This is something we often hear from clients who come to us as well, talking about their sex life not functioning, and this can be both men and women. who will say something like, well, I've already gone to several doctors. I've been checked out. My hormone levels are fine. My prostate is fine. I am physically fine. So why is it I can't either get my erection, or I don't have any desire left? It seems to be not working, but I have proof that my body is working.
Right, right.
Where do you start with someone like that?
Well, it's first of all, I just want to say it's really common, very,
Yeah.
very common. And second of all, I just want to say we are so again, the cultural reference is basically like sex is kind of added on. We've got life and then we have sex. And I like to call it the sexual ghetto. It's like it's pushed off there in some corner somewhere, separate from life. And it shouldn't be. It is a holistic part of ourselves.
Hmm.
And when we treat sex like we are some kind of a machine, right? Like, where's the on switch? And where's the off switch?
Hmm.
we miss the whole thing. We're a holistic organism. So our sexuality is hugely impacted by our thoughts and our feelings.
Hmm.
And in ways, I like to think of a sexual dysfunction. We'll just use that term as somebody who's maybe anorgasmic. That means not able to achieve orgasm, or having erectile dysfunction, otherwise known as ED.
Hmm.
And there's a plethora of other sexual problems that people can be afflicted
Sure.
with. But oftentimes, if there is no physical source, it is emotional and psychological. And I like to think of it as kind of the canary in the coal mine. It's our early warning device. It's
Hmm.
letting us know that there are things awry in our relationship to the
Hmm.
people that we're trying to relate to sexually. And oftentimes, if you're having problems relating to yourself sexually, then there's something amiss in your relationship with yourself.
Right. Yeah,
There's also
we often say that our sex life is kind of like it's like a magnified barometer of our overall relationship status. That whatever else might be off and not quite working seems to be magnified in our sex life. So yeah, you call it the canary in the coal mine. I think that points to the same idea.
It does. It does, because I just think our genitals don't lie.
Hmm.
we,
Yeah.
we lie to ourselves. We go into denial. We pretend everything's okay. We sweep stuff under the rug, but our genitals are like crying foul. They're like, nope, not buying it.
Hmm.
Yeah. And
Yeah, that's an interesting thought.
I do want to add one other thing, though, that often
Yeah.
misses the. When I do an intake, I want to know if somebody's on antidepressants. I want to know if they
Hmm.
are on blood pressure medications. Those sort of things can really wreak havoc with sexuality. But
Yeah.
there's one other thing which oftentimes doesn't get much attention, and the doctor. So let's say I had a client who was telling me that he was having erectile dysfunction, and I told him that he probably needed to go get his cardiovascular checked.
Hmm.
And he was slender, fit, exercised every day, didn't eat. He liked cheese, basically.
Hmm.
Like he liked cheese. That was the only problem with his diet. Everything else in his diet was really super healthy. And I told him, I said, well, if you're having erectile dysfunction, because we covered all the other bases, the
Hmm.
psychological and emotional ones. So he went to his doctor, even though he thought he'd had a clean bill of health. And turns out the doctor immediately said, I need to install stents. You've got cardio problems.
Hmm.
So sometimes before that even happens, before you get to a problem where you've got cardiovascular that's going to show up in the doctor's office, those tiny little arteries inside the penis will clog up first. So I
Hmm.
do like to talk to my clients about adjusting their diet to have fewer animal products if at all possible, and get onto a plant strong diet. But that's just I'm not a nutritionist, so I don't make that the
Right.
mainstay of my practice. But I do always cover that base with my clients,
Well, it
because
sounds like I'm appreciating. It sounds like you're with someone you're open to basically looking at all the possibilities, whether it's physical or emotional or spiritual or
yes, or medication. I
or
I I,
yeah,
I definitely take a holistic approach, and
great.
yeah.
All right, thank you. Well, the next thing I want to get your input on is something I'm sure you do too, but we meet a lot of couples in this case who tell us a story that goes like, in the beginning we had lots of sex, it was awesome, lots of fun, and over time it's like it gets less and less, and then at some point it's like it's not even on the list anymore, and it's kind of just gets relegated to the very bottom of the list, if it's even on the list. Like, what do you, in your experience, what even happens with that? Like with the person you were so excited to have sex with, and then some years later it's as if not at all.
Well, of course, this varies from couple to couple, or relationship to relationship, because I work with people who are in more complicated arrangements,
Hmm.
polyamorous relationships as well. But uh, the it depends on what's going on, and that's something I always do a very thorough intake to try to find out what's going on both sides of the equation.
Hmm.
Um, by and large, I have found that if I can get couples to talk about the things that they are angry and hurt about, which is
Hmm.
oftentimes something they're not even conscious of. But I've got a gift for pulling that stuff out, and
Hmm.
I pull it out, and I help them find the places where they have shut down. And when you start shutting down emotionally, it numbs everything out. So let's say you've got an irritation or a fear, and you've decided you don't want to make a big deal out of it because, quote unquote, it's not worth a fight. And this is when a
Yeah,
lot of couples will go there.
sure.
Oh well, that's just the way she is, or I'm getting used to it, or they kind of set their sights low, do something I call settling. It's like, well,
Hmm.
my friends all have problems too, and mom and dad weren't having a sex life, so why should I expect to have one? There's just this way in which people resign themselves
Hmm.
to a life that is less than what I think they're entitled to. I think we all deserve to live to our fullest, but it takes some courage and it takes some work, because we've got to learn some new patterns. Most of us didn't actually learn how to speak our truth in a way that doesn't damage the relationship, and so we keep all of that to ourselves.
Hmm.
And as a matter of fact, I've I am working on my second book, and it's how to say your no.
Hmm.
Um, so have found this is just crucial for couples. I actually want them to. I've devised 5 simple steps for them to be able to create a no
Hmm.
that pulls their partner closer to them.
Hmm.
And I think that's essential, because oftentimes we just don't want to hurt the feelings of the people that we care about. So we end up agreeing to things we don't actually want to do, and
Hmm.
kind of swallowing our discomfort or fear or anger and trying to get along. But
Yeah, right.
all of this sounds very honorable. It's kind of the stuff that we got taught as kids. Say you're sorry, apologize, be nice. Don't say anything unless you can say something nice, right?
Hmm. Yep.
But unfortunately, this kills a long-term relationship, because a long-term relationship has really got to be predicated on intimacy, emotional intimacy. The emotional intimacy has to come before the sexual intimacy. Now,
Hmm.
there's a few couples that I have encountered who bypass that. They have no emotional intimacy at all, and they've got a vibrant sex life, but it still burns out at some point. It's not for the long haul. If you really want to stay together for a long time, you've got to be working the emotional edges of the relationship, which requires education. You have to learn how to have these conversations, because I would bet money nobody showed you how when you were growing up.
Yeah, unless you're from a very rare family.
Yeah, right.
So I certainly didn't. I wonder if you could you share the like just share maybe the first step of your 5 steps?
Actually, absolutely. As a matter of fact, here in Nevada City, I'm teaching a workshop. It's all about Me Too. So I also help people work these 5 steps on consent issues, and I'm teaching it in a class, a mixed gender class, which was kind of a courageous move on my part, and
Mhm.
a very
Yeah, that's
courageous move
awesome.
on the part of the participants. I'm really excited that they decided to show up for this. But so so basically the first 3 steps are somebody that you care about, and it doesn't have to be your partner, it could be
Mhm.
your mother-in-law, but somebody that you want to have a long-term relationship with and you don't want to alienate them. And they have suggested something maybe that you find really obnoxious,
Mhm.
um, or off-putting or irritating. The temptation is to try to change the topic or to say, yeah, sure, maybe later, or something where you're just kind of stalling. And this starts to create distance right there. So, what we want to do instead is just acknowledge that this person is human for having that desire. So,
Mhm.
I call that first step validation. So, I'm validating you. Like, let's take it to the sexual arena. Let's say your partner wants to do something you have no intention of ever doing sexually, but they would
Mhm.
really like to. So the first thing that I would say to my partner is, well, lots of people enjoy that. I could see why you would be curious about that, or I could see why
Mhm.
you might enjoy that. This is a way of drawing this person closer. Now they feel validated instead of like they're out there, are you going to think I'm weird that I asked for this? Right.
Mhm.
And then the very next thing is to appreciate them. So,
Mhm.
how wonderful that you brought this desire to me,
Mhm.
that you didn't keep this to yourself or take it outside the relationship, that you brought it to me. And then the very next step is to say no. By the way, I will never do that. I have had experience with that I hated it. It's
Mhm.
absolutely like my least favorite thing to do. You see how powerful that no is?
I do.
It's huge. Now, it's not negotiated. It's not mealy-mouthed or wishy-washy or maybe someday, or I hope you don't mind. It's a very firm no. And right on the heels of that, you want to redirect. You want that person that you love and that you care about to get invited to something else. So,
Mhm.
honey, here's the thing. I really am glad we're having this conversation because there's this thing that I've been thinking about that I would really love to
Mhm.
try with you. And eh, if you do that, you're going to get about a 50-50 on this.
Mhm.
Some people, in some moments, it could be the same person over and over again. Some of the time, probably 50% of the time, they're going to go, oh, wow, you'd like to do that? Sure, let's try that instead.
Right, right.
The
Well, I'll
other
tell you,
50,
that's yeah, go ahead.
well, the other 50% of the time, they're going to say, oh, yeah, you didn't like what I like, so I don't like what you like either. So you're going to get this child who's kind of pouting.
Yeah.
And at that point, the fifth step is to invite us to sit down. Let's find something we both like. We can
Mhm.
we can do this. We love each other. Let's talk this out. And so I call that the invitation. The
Mhm.
invitation to partnership.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I love that. And I'll tell you something. I believe you actually in this process will get 100% or close to success rate of, because we teach a similar idea. Have come to a similar idea is whenever somebody offers or suggests, let's say it's a sexual idea, do you want to have sex with me, or do you want to do this or that activity? There's a vulnerability in suggesting something like that, in reaching out to your partner with an idea like that, because every time you do, there's a chance you get a no. So I think you'll get 100% success if you receive it with what you call validation and then appreciation. To
Yes.
basically say whether I want to or not, to just have the most important thing is I start by saying thank you so much for wanting that.
Absolutely.
That you would even ask me about that is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
it's kind of a separate thing whether I want to join you in that or not right now.
Exactly. Exactly. So
And
you've
I
really
really like that you include a step that's, and here's something I am willing to do or that I would like to do.
well
That's super powerful.
to
That's
be
super
quite
powerful
honest.
communication, period.
I learned that as an escort. Okay.
Yeah.
I really did. This is so that extra step, because validation and appreciation are something almost all relationship coaches are teaching in one form or another.
Right.
But the redirect, what I call the redirect, it's like let's send us off into another direction, was specifically designed because the sexual connection was going to be maintained. It just needed to go
Mhm.
in a different direction. And I this is where I feel like a lot of times couples they'll have a disconnect. It's like, okay, well, I hear that you really love me, and appreciate me, but we're still not having sex. Um,
Yeah.
so
Right.
what comes next?
Well, and it's really great for couples listening to this. Even if your partner isn't quite as skilled as running this whole process you just shared,
Yeah.
like if I'm the one suggesting something, I say, you want to have sex with me, and I get an immediate no. Even if my partner doesn't know how to offer an alternative, I can still remember that just because I got a no to my first idea doesn't mean it's a no to everything. It doesn't mean we can't have some sort of sexual connection or some sort of fun or some sort of, intimacy.
Yes.
That there's always the next opening. What's the next thing we could figure out so that, one of the things we know creates huge relationship problems is if, my partner says no to me and I just stop it right there.
Yes.
Then we're left with this big, I suggested something, you said no, and we're just left with a big no and nothing,
Yeah. And
which really wears on us over time.
it's true. And I like to teach the person who's saying the no to take responsibility for suggesting the next thing, because I think personally in relationship, most of us come to each other at about 4 years of age. Even around the sex, we're still about four. We're very vulnerable,
Hmm.
really, really vulnerable, and we can be very easily triggered, very easily hurt. So if I'm going to, proffer a no to somebody that I care about, I want to bring in an invitation so
Hmm.
that they feel how excited I am about being connected with them,
Yeah.
and hopefully that helps carry us through to that next moment, so we're not both just kind of sitting there. Because frankly, if I'm sitting there with my no, I don't feel that great either. I feel
Right.
powerful, but I'm not feeling connected yet. So if I can take us into that redirect and say, "How about this?"
Hmm.
There's a way in which I also feel much more engaged and positive and connected to my beloved. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember once I read a quote from, he's also a PhD in sexologist, Dr. Lerner, I believe is his name, who said that he said, I believe sex acts as the glue that keeps us together. He's
Hmm.
speaking about couples in that case.
Yes, I think it does. I mean, to think about how warm and juicy you feel towards each other the next day.
Hmm. Yeah.
How little things that might have rubbed you the wrong way the day before suddenly roll right off your back.
Yeah, and this is something in our sex workshops we have often heard, in this case particularly women say that, if that I forget how wonderful it feels, in the busyness of everyday life and all our
Mhm.
chores. I just can't keep sight of how wonderful it feels, and if I could somehow remember, then we do it a lot more.
Well, can we go into that a little bit about female sexual desire? Because I'd love to talk about that for a few minutes.
Please.
I think that I mean, there's a lot of women. It's some people say about 80% of the women on this planet, or at least in America, are not having orgasms during intercourse,
Hmm.
and that's fine. You can have your orgasm however it works for you. It doesn't have to be during intercourse. I'm not trying
Hmm.
to set up a standard here.
Right.
But I do it is I would love to empower women to have orgasms any way they want, and as many different ways as possible. And I just feel there's so many ways in which our pornified culture has
Hmm.
really taken us away from the basic truths about female sexual desire and female sexual response. Unfortunately, at least what I see in my office is a lot of women who are trying to emulate what they saw in some pornographic film.
Hmm.
And, right now we're looking at by the age of 11, most young boys have been exposed to online
Hmm.
pornography. And for
Yeah.
girls, it's age 14. So, especially for my clients under the age of 40, it's all about what they've seen. That's where they
Hmm.
got their sex education, is from the pornographic films. And I'm not against pornographic films, but I'll tell
Hmm.
you, I'm pretty opposed to most of what's out there as far as the mainstream stuff.
Yeah.
And
Well, what do you think? What does it do to, boys and girls growing into men and women? What would you say is the impact
there's
of that?
a completely unrealistic expectation about what leads to orgasm for women.
Uh-huh.
And then of course a lot of performance anxiety for men. So the it's all performance oriented because that's what it is. It's a performance.
Uh-huh.
And they're using very specific camera angles to achieve certain visuals
Mhm.
and very narrow range of human bodies.
Mhm.
And the men are performing sex. They're not actually having sexual intimacy
Mhm.
with their partner. And there's been some exceptions to that. Unfortunately, my favorite go-to was Comstock Films, and they seem to be
Mhm.
out of business right now. But they used to
Okay.
only film real couples having real sex with each other. Um, but most of what's out there, these are actors that maybe didn't even know each other until 5 minutes before they got to the set.
Mhm.
And they are using a lot of artificial means to achieve what appears to be sexual arousal and sexual fulfillment.
Mhm.
So by the time somebody tries to apply that in real life, it just doesn't work. And
Right.
I think of a porn star by the name of Jessica Drake.
Mhm.
I had her on my radio show a few years ago, and she was just horrified by her fans, particularly the women, coming up and saying, "Well, I tried that anal sex scene and it didn't work for me." And she's like, "You shouldn't try to do that. It wasn't real." Um,
Yeah.
so then she went off and made a whole line of how tos. Trying to
Mhm.
show women how their bodies actually work.
Yeah.
But I personally, now I wrote a sex manual in 2005, but I'll tell you, I think the best sex manual out there is Sherry Winston's Anatomy of a Woman's Arousal.
Okay.
And it really just shows how little most of us know about the female body.
Uh-huh.
And there's so many components to us. We've got something called the vestibular bulbs. We've got an anterior fornix erogenous zone. Nobody's heard of this stuff, but
Mhm.
they play key parts in creating arousal for the whole woman. And unfortunately, again, we have this mechanistic view of sex, so we're just looking at body parts instead of looking at the whole woman
Mhm.
who needs to be aroused in her entirety. And one of the things that I teach people is, don't be looking for a woman to be lubricated. This is like supposed to be the litmus test. She's lubricated,
Mhm.
so she's ready.
Mhm.
No, actually, she should be swollen and puffy.
Yeah.
So, which is kind of pointing back to our ape ancestors, if you believe in evolution, which I do. But yeah, that's and nobody's looking at that. It's like she's not ready unless she's absolutely aching to be
Mhm.
penetrated. And at that
Yeah.
point, the clitoris has a cuff that wraps around the vaginal barrel. So there's enormous pleasure potential in here if you take your time. And
Mhm.
unfortunately,
Yeah.
just a bunch of routine foreplay is not going to get it. A woman has to feel safe. She has to feel loved. She has to feel seen. And this points to a couple other really important things here. Um, 1 out of 4 girls is sexually abused before she hits,
Mhm.
adulthood.
Yeah.
And then we've got, look at the Me Too movement. It's just so viral. So even for women who haven't been incested or raped, there's just been so much sexual perpetration coming in their
Mhm.
direction. And if you've spent your whole life trying to protect yourself and dodge that, how are you going to open to it? How what
Yeah.
where is so you this is one of the reasons that I want to teach women how to say no. I want
Mhm.
them to have this really beautiful no that's heart centered and joyful and creates connection so that they always know that ultimately their safety is in their hands and
Mhm.
that they're not going to agree to do things that they don't want to do unless and until they want to do them. And
Yeah.
that means we have to have new standards of consent. We have to have standards of consent that say, no means no, but also yes is what we're looking for. We're not looking for an absence of a no. We're looking for the presence of a yes. An
Mm-hmm.
enthusiastic yes.
Right. Maybe that would be a good word to include in the verbiage. An enthusiastic and willing and eyes wide open kind of yes.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned porn in this conversation, and I know you're really big on the shame-free zone and helping us to heal from all the shame. So I wanted to, in that connection, I wanted to ask you about men and porn, because I talk to a lot of men, and I know a lot of, and many more men aren't talking to anyone about it,
Yes,
who use a lot of porn and might
absolutely.
very well be just as addicted to it as one might be to alcohol or cigarettes or drugs, that it's like not even really a choice to just quit,
Yep.
and they feel terrible shame about it, and yet are kind of seem to need it. Like, how do you start
Well,
helping a man like that, or a couple even, where that's
yeah.
because often it's in a couple, where the woman knows that this is present and feels terrible or abandoned or betrayed about
Oh,
it.
yes, yes, yes. All kinds of,
How do we start that conversation?
well, first, I always start the conversation by creating a shame free container for this
Mhm,
conversation, which is that I have produced pornographic films and I have appeared in several pornographic films. Now, I was very selective. I didn't do mainstream porn. I did what I considered feminist and educational porn. But I don't have any judgments against sexually explicit material.
mhm,
So, and that's usually creates a comfort zone for the men in particular, because I think sometimes they kind of get used to women having this wagging judgmental finger,
mhm,
and I don't, and I'm not looking at, okay, you should never look at this, and it's abusive towards women. I think some of the stuff that's out there, and perhaps even a lot of the stuff that's out there at this point in our cultural journey, has become incredibly degrading and abusive
mhm. Yeah.
and misogynistic. So, but I say it within this context of there can be good porn and bad porn. And I took one of my clients, he was really addicted to masturbating to porn. He had to masturbate several times a day, had to start his day that way, end his day that way, and take a lunch break for it. And
Mhm,
I also worked with a client who lost 3 jobs for masturbating to porn on the
mhm,
job. So I also ask people, how uncomfortable are you with this? It's kind of like alcoholism. You have to get to the point where it's creating problems in your life and you
mhm,
really, really want to quit. And those are usually the people that I've helped, because they're saying, ouch, I'm not having fun anymore. I am miserable and I'm
mhm,
suicidal and I need help. So and that's the other thing to know is that, uh, you know, addiction to porn can actually lead to suicidal ideation, because it can create a great deal of psychic pain. Now, there's also another thing that happens, and I would say this happens before somebody gets to the point where they feel like killing themselves. They're just masturbating so often to high speed internet, and this
mhm,
burns out some of the receptors in the brain. And they can come back, but you have to go off of it. You have to stop looking at internet porn for at least a good 30 days to
mhm,
try to get those neurons to reset. And there's actually online groups that men have formed to support each other in getting off of porn for a month so they can get their erection back. And what's
mhm,
astounding is that we're often talking about young men in their 20s and 30s.
mhm.
So that's just a very real physiological thing that can occur. And
So you're saying basically the masturbation to internet porn can make it harder or impossible to have an erection?
yes, even while masturbating. Yeah.
Hmm.
So, and it certainly creates a lot of difficulty having an erection and reaching orgasm during intercourse with a real live human being.
Mhm.
Um, so men can kind of get addicted to the touch of their own hand. They know exactly where they want to go and what speed they want to go, and they just become less and less connected to sex with real people. So,
Yeah.
and this is one of the things that can create a lot of of depression and
Mhm.
despair.
Yeah.
So the way out of this depends on where you're at in it and your relationship with it. But by and large, I usually ask people to associate different stimuli. This
Uh-huh.
is just kind of like Pavlov's dog. He took a bell, he rang it at dinner time, and the dog started
Sure.
salivating every time they heard the bell. So it's a very basic form of reprogramming. And I will
Mhm.
ask men to perhaps start masturbating to romantic porn that I will locate for them. That they can purchase, which is out of the box for them. Maybe it's going to be in a
Mhm.
DVD, so we slow the bandwidth down. I don't want them on hopping all over from site to site on the internet, because that is
Mhm.
a really good way to burn out the receptors in the brain. But so we changed the kind of porn. And this one guy that I was telling you about, who had to come home on his lunch break to masturbate, when I gave him a Comstock film, which was a real couple that was in love and in a long-term committed relationship having
Mhm.
sex, he called me up crying. He said, "I can't masturbate this. It makes me cry."
Hmm.
And I was like, that was the point. I want your penis to get connected to your heart.
Yeah. Oh no, that's a very big deal.
Yeah. So, in a non judgmental way, I just try to help each individual person find the thing that is going to connect them to their heart. And a lot of times we have to find where they got disconnected from their heart.
Mhm.
Sometimes young boys will use masturbation to porn to soothe themselves. And,
Right.
and so then we kind of have to go back into the childhood and find out what they were trying to soothe or forget.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, this is
so
wonderful material, Veronica.
yeah.
Hey, I wanna ask you something else that is a very common thing both Sonica and I have, and maybe you too, have visited with many couples in this case who have excuse me, who have a dynamic where they have an active sex life. They maybe might have sex 2 or 3 or 4 times a week, but in this case, the men in these couples are like very set on having sex every single day with intercourse.
Yes.
And despite having trying many different angles and much, both emotional connection and intimacy and conflict resolution and teaching communication skills, seem to have difficulty just getting away from I have to have it every day. And
Yes.
actually to the point of threatening divorce, even though being married to someone who is happy to have sex, maybe
Right.
3 or 4 times a week, but doesn't wanna have the pressure of having to do it every single day.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wonder what your input would be on a situation like that.
Well, it's painful. It's very painful for couples that are going through that. And you're right. It tends to be men that are putting that kind of pressure. Not always. There are some women out there that are
Mhm.
just like, why doesn't he want to have sex with me 3 times a day?
Mhm.
I've actually met those women. It's astounding. But by and large, it tends to be men that are putting that pressure on women.
Mhm.
But whoever's gender, whatever their gender is, you can rest assured that there's an addictive impulse behind that. And it's not
Mhm.
because I'm making a judgment about how often they should or shouldn't have sex. That's not the point. The point is the energy behind it. If you are demanding, pressuring your partner for it, you're not actually engaging in sex that's connected.
Hmm.
You're already abandoning the heart connection, and you're placing some primacy on an act, which suggests to me that your partner is going to be even less interested in engaging in it because they don't feel uh, loved and embraced. They actually feel kind of used and
Yeah, I mean,
objectified.
that's what invariably happens, that the partner who actually on her own has a good flow of sexual energy and desire, feels that it basically kills her desire to say yes.
Absolutely, because who wants to be a receptacle? I mean, that's just, it's gross. So let's back up and practice empathy for the person who's having the sex addiction.
Mhm.
And I do believe in sex addiction. A lot of my colleagues don't. I do. I've treated it. I see I know what it feels like to be with somebody who's a sex addict
Mhm.
professionally. So, and it's very, very different energy. You can be talking to this person and having a deep, meaningful, connected soul to
Mhm.
soul conversation. And as soon as their penis gets erect, all of a sudden you're an object.
Mhm.
All of a sudden they're an object. And that's what I really want people who have a sex addiction to understand. They're objectifying themselves. There's a way in which they're disconnecting from themselves. And I understand it can be very soothing and comforting to engage in our addictions. I know this very well. I'm a recovered alcoholic addict. I've got 33 years of sobriety, but I certainly have not forgotten what it feels like to make all those demons in your head and go away by engaging in your addiction. But sex isn't supposed to be a way of getting out of pain. It's supposed to be a way of getting into pleasure with another person, and or with yourself even. So I will try to take people in a direction towards sacred sexuality and get them to slow down and bring in some Kundalini yoga breathing, some meditation techniques, some sacred self-pleasuring rituals that I share with my clients, because I want them to start getting this full connection to sexuality. So how I treat sexual addiction is to go towards a different type of sex. I don't go away from sex. I don't try to tell people have less of it. I just say, we're going to do it different. We're going to do a different kind. And then, of course, we've got to talk about what kind of feelings are you keeping at bay here. The reason that we see this more in men than women, I believe, is because so many young boys are trained away from having the full array of their human emotions.
Yeah.
They're told they can have two things. They can be angry or they can be horny. So let's say I'm scared or I'm frustrated or I'm depressed or I've got all these other feelings that I cannot have. Well, I just throw it into sex. And that's very painful and destructive long term. But so that we kind of have to back up and start looking at that stuff.
Yeah, that's really good wisdom. Hey, I could talk to you and ask you questions all day, but I don't want to make this podcast be hours and hours. I do want to ask you one more thing, though.
Yes.
Before we say goodbye for today, and that is another question we often get, and we talk about it in our sex workshops, but I want to get your perspective on it. Is a single person who doesn't currently have a sexual partner. Will often think that, how is sex even relevant to me? I don't really have, I myself used to think this when I didn't have sexual partners. I didn't even think about it. So like, how is that relevant? Or I guess the question is sex relevant to someone who doesn't have a sexual partner currently? Or is it, like many people will say, well, I'll worry about that when I have a partner.
Well, I love how one interviews just circle right back to the very beginning, because at the beginning of this conversation, I was talking about masturbation in the womb. Right. And it's obvious that the human was meant to have a sexual relationship with themselves. And it has relevance. If it didn't have relevance, it wouldn't have occurred before you were born. So finding out what that relevance is, getting away from the pornography, not because pornography is bad, but because it can kind of take you down this avenue where you're disconnected from yourself, and start looking at how you feel when you touch yourself and how you feel about yourself and how you connect with yourself as far as your self-esteem goes. I like to take people on a sacred sexual journey with their self-pleasuring so that they start to develop a relationship with their higher self. And I also teach them how to grieve and express anger and explore all kinds of taboo emotions during orgasm. This is kind of an uncommon path, but it's one that I've walked, and I share it with my clients to just really start realizing that this is one of the ways that you can really fully affirm even what you want in your life. You could visualize things that you want to pull into your life while you are taking yourself on a sacred sexual self-pleasuring journey. And it will be more powerful because for those 8 seconds that you're having that orgasm, your brain is very suggestible. But there's also just the vibrancy. People who are having a vibrant sexual connection with themselves and or others are oftentimes healthier, happier, and more productive and more creative. So if you're either not able to have relationship with other people or don't want to have relationship with other people, I still want my clients to have a sexual relationship with themselves. But I
Yeah.
want it to be holistic, loving, spiritual, sacred, tender, um, expansive, not just some furtive, shameful thing they're doing before they go to sleep at night. Um,
Yeah.
I want it to be an event. I mean, light the candles, put on the incense, take your mind away from romance and put
hmm
it on yourself and how much you want to affirm the things that you love about yourself and how much you want to
Yeah.
heal the things that maybe need to be healed.
I remember that was a big breakthrough for me when even did the linguistic change from when I stopped calling it "I'm just jerking off" to
Yeah.
pleasuring myself. Like
Yes.
even it just that it has such a softer and different feel. It was, it's one of those things that made me blush in private just to say it because I was
Yes.
so unaccustomed to thinking that softly about myself.
Oh, yeah.
But that was a big, big breakthrough and actually changed the course of how I think and act sexually for the rest of my life.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. That's beautiful. Just beautiful.
Yeah. Well,
And I
thank you so much. Oh, hey, yeah. It
oh,
sounds like you got something else here.
two
Go
things,
for it,
just two quick things.
please.
I'll send you some links to masturbation in the womb, but I also just
Wonderful.
want your listeners to know they can just go Google Mary Roach, 10 Things You Never Knew About Sex. It's a TED Talk, and she will actually show you a sonogram of a fetus masturbating. Um,
Awesome.
and then the other thing, of course, is I want your people to come over and pre-order a copy of How to Say Your No.
I was going to ask you, how do they find that?
It's very easy. They could just find it on Publishizer. It's PUBLISHIZER.com and then / how to say your no. But I think it'd be easier for me to just give you a link you can post at the bottom of this.
Yeah, send me a link. I'll
Yeah.
put it in the description so people can easily find that.
Fabulous.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time. I
Oh,
really
you know what?
appreciate it.
Wait a second. I could give the simple thing. They could get my book. Actually, there's a link right on my website. What was I thinking? So
Okay. And that's on the shamefreezone.com.
the shamefreezone.com. You can find it over
That
there.
one is easy to remember.
That's a lot easier.
All right.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate so much you take your time to talk with us, Veronica, and I appreciate your tremendous contribution to this world having a more soft and open and dignified and shame-free conversation about sex. I'm a firm believer that will impact and improve all of our relationships and in that way all of our lives. So thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Thank you. It was always fun to talk with you, Christian.
Yes, thank you. And to everybody who joined us, thanks so much for listening in. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Dare to Love podcast. You have been listening to the Dare to Love podcast with your hosts, Sonica Tinker and Christian Peterson, founders of LoveWorks. And hey, if you found this podcast to be useful, would you go ahead and hit the share button and share this with your friends on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or wherever your favorite hangouts are? Thanks so much for sharing the love. And you can find more about our work at loveworksforyou.com. Thank you.